There you go, up in the left, right, I see. Okay. So the schedule, welcome everybody. The schedule will be after the floor on Tuesdays. Today is an exception, but after the floor on Tuesday morning till 11:30 or maybe a little bit later because we'll be starting late. But on the other days, we'll go from 8:30 to 11:30 with a 15-minute break. I usually don't, we usually didn't take that long of a break before, but I sense the weariness of people and the opportunity to do a few little things in the meantime. I do want to say that Senator Clarkson, this is this is primarily because of your level of participation in these meetings, which I value incredibly and so much and enjoy. But I think I want to try and start having people raise their hands when they want to be recognized. I've heard a few people suggest that to me to keep things a little bit more orderly. I'm certainly not going to be strict about it because I violate it myself all the time in finance. So, but Becca's great at it, and Randy, I know you'll be good at it as well. So that's one thing. As far as this uh, today, Senator Ballant, I already made the comment that I know what I'm up against in terms of having the entire leadership of the Senate on my committee. Uh,
Yes, I know. I'm sorry, Senator.
no, that's fine. Senator Brock already informed me that the um, Senate Republicans are meeting every Tuesday from 9 to 9:30. And given that we're such a small committee, I just threw in the towel and say, we will meet after the floor on Tuesdays and not try and meet at 8:30 because it's just too choppy. But this week, we're going to talk with Damien at 9 o'clock in Senator Brock's absence, getting started on UI and workers' comp. I've been in contact with the commissioner, and they will be here later this morning and tomorrow to talk about all the UI issues, and they're plentiful. The one that I think we need to get started on right away and perhaps get a bill out on is, you recall last year, I can't remember whether it was April or May or June, but in the early session, we modified significantly the rules for unemployment compensation for beneficiaries and for employers in terms of their chargeability. But we liberalized it to take into account that people were coming up against COVID, both in their ability to go to work, having a job there for them, and also to search for work. And the presumption I have going into these discussions is that those policies have been sound and have worked out, at least in terms of the statutes and practice, to help people get income replacement during the COVID. What we didn't count on was the pandemic extending as long as it did. So on the unemployment, I think the sunset date is March 1st, which is not too far away in legislative time. And at the very least, the most simple change we would make would be to pick a new date for that law to sunset before it sunsets and get it over to the governor to sign. So you recall there are things like, if you are a high risk individual, and even though your job may be still open to you, we weren't forcing you to go take that job in a COVID environment. In terms of work search, that's not a statutory change, but we may need to look at that because I think the commissioner wants to look at that and the governor wants to look at that. But we didn't want people out there on the street, so to speak, looking for jobs and knocking on doors. If you had childcare, you had to take care of your child because of COVID, or someone in your family had COVID, you could use that as a reasonable uh, basis for claiming unemployment benefits. Usually you can't. It usually, if you're out sick or somebody in your family is out sick and you leave, you go through a disqualification for unemployment. It may be short, but you do go through a disqualification. So it has to be, I should back up and say, for Keisha's sake, and I think others know this, I've often said this, I think the unemployment statute and the unemployment system is the most Byzantine law we have on the books. It just goes on and on and on with so many subparagraphs. It's an anachronism. I mean, I know we cleaned up the liquor laws. This is another law that if we had 2 years, we should clean up. It's a complicated area. I have a long history with it, so that's helpful, I think, to the committee and to fleshing out some questions of the commissioner. So that's what we're. Yes, Senator Brock.
I think one of the things that I think we should also be thinking about is the systems aspect, because this law is a classic example of something that becomes so labor intensive, and we found that by the army of people that we had to hire when we were faced with the COVID press. This is an opportunity for us to really think about artificial intelligence to the extent that it can reduce the labor intensity of what we do and therefore reduce some of the cost of government.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And one of the things I hope we will all hammer the administration on every time they come before us is, what is the status of their modernization of their computers and how can we help? If there's resources that we can direct that way. As you know, there's been several false starts on that, where they've had money and then they started to do it and they stopped doing it. And then I think they were in the process of doing something when COVID hit, and I'm sure that has stopped them pretty much in their tracks. But what's the phrase we use, coming out of this better or whatever? If that's one of the things we're trying to do here, we need to keep our focus on modernizing the system. I think a lot of states have gotten there already. I shouldn't say a lot of them, but a lot of them have gotten federal dollars to modernize their computers, and we haven't. Senator Clarkson.
Yes, we were working with 3 states to join forces to do that, and that fell apart. And I'm not sure we were any further, but lessons learned in building back better together. Definitely our UI IT system needs a major infrastructure infusion of capital and investment. And I think we could actually entertain a bill, just as we did with the liquor statutes. We could definitely address this title and have it updated. And we should chat with Damien about how much work that would take. It would be a huge amount of work, but if we did that bill this year, we'd have it probably done by the time we leave in 22.
Well, let's make sure we ask the commissioner today, get an update on the status of his. I know they're sensitive to it and want to do it. I don't know what impediments there may be at this point. But I think given what happened last summer, I think the legislature is ready to pounce in terms of getting something done here. Senator Ballant.
Just briefly, one of the things that I know we had been watching pretty closely is the ways in which some states who had moved a lot of their UI interface to the cloud in anticipation of the surge that was going to happen were much more ahead of us, Rhode Island included. So one of the things that I'll want Damien to do for us when he gets his feet under him and gets the decks cleared up from all the bills we've had him working on for drafting is to do some research for us about what were the things that Rhode Island and other states faced that enabled them to anticipate the surge and deal with it in real time. I think there's going to be a lot of work that we'll have to do on a postmortem when the pandemic is truly through. But I do think there are some, as Senator Brock said, there may be some systems and some technology pieces that we should think about adapting going forward, because we just don't know what the future holds in terms of another surge and what we might be looking at. So, I mean,
the whole system, and I mean, just look at the building that the Department of Labor is in. It's indicative of everything about the system. It's like a building out of Moscow. It's really old and dated and square, and I think it's representative of the law and their systems, more so than most of Vermont at this point. So let me just jump to workers' comp briefly, and then I want to spend about 10 or 15 minutes while we still have Senator Brock in the most general terms, just talking about priorities for the committee, and hear what you folks have to say, because I know that's going to be a topic of a caucus or chairs meeting at some point today, I think. So on workers' comp, Keisha, we all enthusiastically passed a bill last year dealing with giving people who come down with COVID, who are working, who have been working, a presumption, but only for frontline workers, that they contracted the disease on work. It's an airborne disease. It's really hard to determine where you caught the disease, and it's not like breaking a leg on the job versus at home. And as you may know, in workers' comp, the injury has to be work related. So you just don't know for these frontline workers where that happened. So we gave them the presumption, and that bill, we sunsetted on January 15th. So COVID's still going, and we'll hear from Steve Monahan how many cases he has had and how it's working. One of the controversial things on this bill last year was how broad to open it up. We gave the discretion to the commissioner to broaden it beyond frontline workers if he saw some sort of pattern develop. The educators wanted to be in there, and there was some pushback as to how much risk they would have. And my understanding is that the numbers are really low. I think in the press conference yesterday, it was like 0.1% of school staff had come down with COVID, which is even less than the general population. But we'll hear from the commissioner, and to the extent the education community is still pushing to be included in that bill, I'm certainly open to that. I don't think if it's going to be controversial, I think we might want to bifurcate it and get the sunset date pushed out, get that off on the rails, and maybe come back to expanding it, trying to keep it simple in the first instance. So I wrote a few bullets to Senator Ballant about what I saw as priorities at this point, subject to discussions over the next few weeks for this committee, and it's unemployment insurance, which is much broader than what I have just talked to. The administration's coming in with a plan that, like they did last year, for rate relief for employers that are going to get some sticker shock because of so many people being laid off. Their rates are going to go very high. They need to make that change if they're going to do it by July 1st. This committee pushed back on that being decided last year because things continually change, and we felt we had time this session to make that change in time for July 1st with more current information. I was also concerned that workers need help as well, and if we're going to impact the trust fund, we need to know, who's getting some help, whether it's workers, employers, or both. We need to understand that. They're also talking about lowering freezing the base on which employers get taxed. One is the taxable rate, is what I was just talking about. Now they're also talking about how much employer gets taxed on. It was at 16.1. It went down to 14.2 in January, and it's due to go back next January, I think, to 16 by predictions, and they want to freeze it at 14. So those are some big issues, and there's a lot of number crunching there. We're going to have Matt Barowitz, who's their numbers guy, to say, what is the impact on the fund? What you want to be very careful about is getting that fund into the red, because if you get into the red, then there's this thing called the federal food tax, which I think is like something like 5% or something. And that gets, right now it gets as long as you're in the black, that gets waived by the federal government. If you go into the red, that hits employers really hard. So we need to make sure we don't bring that fund down to below zero. Talked about in my short note to the pro tem about the economic recovery grants, how those are working, and what more we can be doing for small business. This committee has been a big believer in the demographic problems Vermont faces and trying to attract more business and workers here to the state. So we'll be looking at that. And then housing. I'm really excited about housing. I mean, we have $200 million we're getting from the feds that we may have a difficult time spending depending upon what the guidelines are from the feds on how to spend it. But I've been getting inundated with emails of ideas of how some of that money can be spent. And I encourage that because I don't want people just to focus on the 10% flexible money when there's a much bigger pot of money. That I had a call this morning just on SASH and their needs. And I said, well, couldn't that be considered rent? And why can't we like somehow make the argument that some of that $200 million could be used towards SASH payments? It's usually thought of as services, but it really is putting a roof over people's head in the best place possible. So those were my ideas for the pro tem. I know this is obviously a work in progress, but if anybody has other big ideas, I know Senator Brock had some idea on broadband and how we would interface with finance and economic development. Senator Ballant.
Oh, just to echo what you just said, Mr. Chair, I had a meeting yesterday with Steve Klein and Catherine Benham at JFO. And really what I came out thinking about was that we have a sort of a snapshot right now of the money that's coming in, though each day we get more information about what the guardrails are and where we can be more creative. And I love that you are giving us this charge, because that is exactly what I'm going to be talking about with chairs this afternoon too, that there is an opportunity for flexibility in how we spend this money. And I think we all on this committee want to make sure we're meeting short-term needs, but also really building structures that are going to last beyond this emergency. The other thing I wanted to say is, I know, Senator Rahm, you're in the unenviable position of coming into a committee where you're the only new person. And I just want to give you permission to keep a running tab on things that you need more information on. And feel free to just stop us in real time and say, this is, a jargon that I don't understand. And you're a quick study. We all know that. And so please don't be afraid to ask us for more information as we go along.
Senator Brock.
I'd just like to offer a cautionary note regarding the federal largesse that we're going to benefit from. The federal government has a long history of giving states money to do programs, particularly things that are new, and then after 1 or 2 years walking away and then leaving us with the task of trying to figure out how we're going to continue doing them. This broadband, for example, the subsidy of low-income people for broadband is a classic example of that. I just think it would be wise for us to always keep in mind, as we're spending this money, what's the tail of this, and what are we going to do when the federal largesse stops?
Yeah, it's in significant part, it's one-time money. And so we need to be careful about that. But at the same time, we need to be creative, as Senator Ballant said. Senator Clarkson.
So to that end, there are already people thinking about that. I would hope that we would have Matt Dunn in at the Center on Rural Innovation, who actually has thought about that tail and has some proposals to make on how we would continue and make these things sustainable. That is our challenge, is how do we leverage federal largesse into sustainable programs that can improve the lives of Vermonters. I think, that is our challenge. And that's going to be our real challenge in housing, where it's initially seems very prescriptive about how we're going to be able to use that money. And yet we are also there may be room for some serious creativity, which is exciting, but that's going to be a harder one to noodle, because it's a lot of money, and our housing people can see us going so far with it, in the purposes it's been prescribed for, but we're gonna have to be pretty clever about $80 million of that. So,
And I'd like to say, my back of the envelope, I think there's much more than 80 million, because we spent we couldn't spend the 25 million over a 7-month period. This
Right.
is an 18-month period, but there's 200 million. So
Right.
I think if you do the math, there could be a lot more.
Right.
Lot
And-
more.
and I have faith that we'll do that, just given how we managed to leverage the last CRF money into things that into build outs and into housing that is permanent
Right.
solutions for a
That's-
large percent of our homeless population, and for many other low income people. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do exactly what we're talking about.
And for working Vermonters as well as low
Yeah.
income people. Senator Brock, did you want to say something about the broadband message that you sent to me?
Yeah, a couple things. Before I get to broadband, I just wanted to mention a couple of other initiatives that I think do, to some extent, fall into the economic development area. One is looking for a way, perhaps over a couple of year period. We have a bill pending now on eliminating military retirement pay from taxation. And one of the things that needs to be filled in is, where do we make that revenue up from? And I suspect that one of the ways we make that revenue up from is by attracting people to our workforce, because to help solve that demographic problem that we've been working on for the past 3 years, and that the tax revenue we get from those new people, as well as the addition of classes of employees that we don't have right now. And in particular, I'm thinking about nurses. I'm thinking about medical professionals, where we are literally spending millions of dollars hiring traveling nurses because we can't get them on our own. And this recruitment that we talked about last year, to some extent, of extending our recruitment to places that actually have military hospitals as opposed to Fort Drum, is a classic way to begin doing that. And that's one of the things I would like to emphasize this year, to get some of those critical skills that we need and that we don't have. The second thing is we have this crisis in higher education that we've got to deal with. How are we going to keep Northern Vermont University and many of those things operating? And my question there again is, as an economic development initiative, of identifying those skills that we're critically in need of, and ensuring that our higher ed institutions are actually turning people out to fill those jobs. In other words, that matching. And again, I know the Education Committee will be working on this, on the nursing pieces, I'm sure health and welfare, but this is to a great extent an economic development initiative that I think we should have our finger in as well. Now, to go on to broadband, which you asked me about. I've been working with Tim Briglin, who's the chair of the committee that deals with technology in the House, to try to make sure that the House and the Senate on broadband are working to some extent in concert. Tim is taking a lot of the more mundane stuff, the how do we improve what we have already on the books? How do we check whether or not what we're doing is working, and then reviewing where we are, and a lot of individual initiatives. And I'm trying to tackle the organizational structure for broadband. And among the things we're talking about is a revival of the Vermont Telecommunications Authority, which went dormant several years ago. And so I've been meeting with Commissioner Tierney, with some folks from the governor's office to talk about how we can restructure the VTA to actually make it something that in effect creates a broadband czar. So somebody is responsible and accountable in government for moving broadband forward as a first piece. And second, to deal with the conflict that exists right now between the Department of Public Service and internet providers, in which they're both a regulator and an advocate. We've seen so often in government where that doesn't work particularly well. We also have the conflict that's occurring between the private sector providers and our CUDs, where on the one hand, the private protectors consider their material proprietary and don't want to release information about what they do and where they do it and how they do it. But at the same time, they're in financial competition with the CUDs, which are public entities in which they're public records. So there's a whole morass there to try to straighten out as well. So that's just a little quick background.
Well, before you leave, could you touch upon how this broadband issue would affect this committee versus finance? I mean, I don't want to duplicate the efforts of the finance committee.
Well, I think the finance committee is the place at which we place these technology issues in the Senate, and that's probably where it should be. But I think this committee has a role too, because broadband is such a tremendous economic development tool, or lack of development tool, depending on how it's used. And I think in terms of the work that we do, keeping our eyes open and our ears open to the economic development implications of that, that to me falls within the purview of this committee as well.
Okay.
Now, perhaps having finance and economic development talk about that to try to define who does what is perhaps the next thing to do. But I do think this committee has a role.
Okay, well, at least we have two people still on the finance committee, so we have that bridge, you and me. So it's,
And I'm going to run, but
right, and we have
we get done,
Damien with
I'll
us.
be back. But otherwise,
Thank you. We'll see you after the floor.
okay, thank you.
Bye-bye. Good morning, Damien.
Good
Uh-oh.
morning.
How
How is
are you?
everybody?
Good. How are you? A nice beard.
Thank you.
Okay, huh?
Damien, I thought of you
Just-
this morning as I was about to get in the car, and I slipped on my Alukai sneakers, and I know you and I share a love of the Alukai sneakers. So it's nice to see
Yes.
you.
Yeah, although I haven't had much occasion to wear them this year. I've been staying around the house so much. But
How are the little ones?
they're good. They're thankfully off at school this morning, so I think they're happier and we're happier having them out of the house during the day.
Good.
It's nice, but yeah, they're doing much better now that schools are open again, and they're very happy to be with their friends.
In terms of scheduling, Damien, because you're going to be front and center for our opening weeks, I think, are you available first at 9 a.m.? I just want to know for scheduling purposes, or are you available at 8:30?
At 9 a.m. is probably the best. Sometimes I can do as early as 8:45, but that's tight. It really depends on how the drop off at school goes with all the COVID-19 screening.
Yep.
Sometimes I get there and there's a long line of cars and you have to wait to get the kids' temperatures taken and stuff. And then other days you zip right through. So.
Okay, good enough. So I hope it was clear what we're sort of looking for in this next half hour from you. We want to go back to, at least on UI, if we can get to workers' comp, we'll do that as well. But on UI, what were the changes we made in, I got the numbers wrong initially on the agenda, but in terms of the spring legislation that liberalized eligibility and changed chargeability. And I just want you to go refresh the committee's memory of what we did. I believe the sunset date on a lot of that was March 1st. I had asked, I haven't seen any Senate bills yet, but I know a bunch of senators here have agreed to sign on to both the workers' comp and the UI bill in terms of just changing the sunset. But I haven't seen those surface yet, but I'm sure they'll be coming forth. They're not complicated, so I'm sure they'll be coming forth pretty soon.
Yeah, let me see if I have put together a summary. The UI sections from Act 91, great. And then if, let's see, if I could be made a co-host, Nathan, I can share my screen and just walk the committee through, oh, well, this is a very brief summary that I can give the committee to post on the website. And then I can also do a walkthrough of the bill if you'd like, or just talk about the particular the upcoming issue that we've got as far as the sunset goes.
I think we need the background from last year, just
Okay.
because if we're going to extend the law, we want to make sure we're comfortable with.
Would it work better for you if I did a very short bullet point, or kind of a walkthrough of Act 91 from last year where we made the big changes?
Bullet point.
Okay. So, Nathan, am I a co-host? Oh. I think I am.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen right now. Let me just see if I can just get the view a little larger so everyone can see it. In Act 91, the first section, Section 29, was a housekeeping piece for the Department of Labor to allow for electronic business registration. It didn't relate to COVID-19 directly. Section 30 was the first really important piece there. And what this allowed was two things. It protected employers' experience ratings, and then as a result of that, their unemployment insurance tax rates from being adversely impacted by employees who voluntarily quit their jobs for a COVID-19 related reason. Because they had an underlying health condition and the workplace wasn't safe, because they had to quarantine, take care of a loved one, something like that. The next thing it did is for employers who had to shut down their operations, either because they had a COVID-19 outbreak or due to public health order from the governor, it protected them from an adverse impact on their experience ratings for that. There were two caveats with that, though, which we may want to revisit, and I think you'll want to talk to the Commissioner of Labor about today. The first was that it was only for 8 weeks of experience rating relief, and then any additional time beyond that was left up to the Commissioner's discretion. The second point was that they were required to rehire the employees afterwards. Right. And this may be problematic in some instances because businesses have been so drastically impacted, they may not be able to rehire everyone that they laid off. And in addition, individuals may have switched jobs during the time that they were laid off, so they may not be able to recapture all of those employees. So that language may need to be adjusted now.
And I think in my conversations with the commissioner, I think they're going to propose those two changes, but we'll find out earlier.
Yeah, I think that's my early impression as well, but I think that's better for them to talk about. Right. Section 31 authorized individuals to quit their jobs for certain COVID-19 related reasons and still be eligible to receive unemployment insurance benefits. So these are reasons such as needing to care for a loved one who's sick, needing to quarantine because the school or daycare where your children are has closed due to COVID-19, and you need to stay home and take care of your children. And so this basically allowed those individuals to be eligible to receive unemployment insurance benefits if they had an eligible reason to quit.
Could you go through those reasons?
Sure.
I know there was one sentence that had a laundry list of reasons.
Yeah, let me pull up. This is the Act 91 here. All right, so here are the reasons. So they are self-isolating, they're caring for or assisting a family member who's self-isolating or quarantining quarantining because they've been diagnosed with COVID-19, they're experiencing symptoms of COVID-19, they've been exposed to COVID-19, or they're in a specific class or group of persons who have been identified as being at risk if exposed to or infected with COVID-19. All of those same reasons apply if it's the individual employee themselves and not their family member. So they've been exposed to COVID-19, or they're at high risk, or they're sick with it. And then the other piece here is, like I said, to care for or assist a family member who's left in employment because of an unreasonable risk that they could be exposed to or become infected with COVID-19 at their place of employment. So, for example, if you have a family member with a respiratory issue and their doctor has recommended that they isolate at home, particularly if they are at high risk and unable to go out, you may have left employment to take care of them or assist them. And then there's left employment to care for a child under 18 because the school or child care has been closed, or the child care provider is unavailable due to a public health emergency related to COVID-19. So for children in, for example, a home daycare, the home daycare closes down because either the daycare provider or a family member of that provider is diagnosed with COVID-19 or required to quarantine. And again, these all apply to the individual as well here. So here's the laundry list for the individual, which is the same list as we went through below.
So a couple of things for Senator Rahm's benefit. She probably knows this, but the number of people that are qualifying for unemployment in a certain business impacts your experience rating. And so the charge to the business goes up if they've laid off workers and unemployment insurance has been paid to those workers. And that's the first section, relieves those people of those charges. There's things that we call socializing the costs. So it gets spread across all employers as opposed to that individual. Like we have laws on domestic violence. If you have to leave for a reason like that, that charge wouldn't be on the employer. So I guess I'm curious. I don't know if you can talk to this, or this is something we definitely want to hear from the commissioner about. A lot of those reasons that you put forward there could be temporary in nature. What is the responsibility after 2 or 3 weeks for the employee to go back? Or I know there was something you said about the lack of chargeability would be for 8 weeks, or in the discretion of the commissioner, it could be extended longer. And I'm assuming that he's extended that longer in a lot of cases. But what if the quarantine one, for instance, so you quarantine for 14 days. After 14 days, are you required to go back? Or what's going on in the real world there? Do you know?
So the issue here with these are instances where you might need to quit your job in order to do that because you don't have leave available. There is a federal leave law that was put into place temporarily that allowed people to take time off up to 2 weeks for things like quarantine or to care for a loved one. And so that leave law was put in place, and then you get up to 12 weeks for childcare total when you use that law. The 8 weeks of relief, just to clarify, and I wasn't clear about this before, was that this applied to the employer shutdown reasons. So the employer could shut down or temporarily lay off its staff for up to 8 weeks in order to and then be relieved of benefits. So it's the way the law reads is an employer shall be relieved of charges for benefits paid to an individual for a period of up to 8 weeks if the employer temporarily ceased operations in response to a public health authority request or a state of emergency declared by the governor.
So that's for a temporary shutdown for an individual worker who is at high risk or taking care of a child. That rate relief continues indefinitely, even without the commissioners.
That's correct. That's correct. The important thing here is the restrictions on unemployment insurance mean that if you're able to return to work, so you're able and available to return to work, and there is a reasonable offer of employment. So your employer says, okay, you had to be out for 6 weeks. You weren't eligible for leave, and I apologize, I forget the limitations on the leave eligibility, but I can pull that up for our second half today. But if you've collected unemployment for 6 weeks, but now you're able and available to return to work, and the positions available, you cannot stay on unemployment insurance indefinitely. So this is kind of the push and pull that we were dealing with in September, where the initial emergency had passed and folks with an underlying health condition might not be able and available to return to work because of a good cause health reason, but other individuals who were on unemployment and now that the positions had become available again were able to return if they didn't have an underlying health condition or other COVID-19 related reason to stay home. And so that was something we discussed a little bit in September. The commissioner can talk a little bit about what their experience has been with that. But that's something that the federal department has been continuing to emphasize, is that if people don't have an underlying COVID-19 related reason that allows the commissioner to waive the able and available requirement, they need to be able and available for work. And if they receive a reasonable offer of employment and reject it, and there's no COVID-19 related reason for them to reject it and no other good cause reason for them to reject it, and that would be something like they're being hired to temporarily replace union workers who are out on strike or something like that, then they lose their unemployment insurance at that point. So
Talk to us a little bit about the work search requirement. My understanding is that's a procedure or policy put in place by the Department of Labor. We didn't change that in law, that they had some discretion as to not requiring someone to do a work search during this period. So what I'm trying to get at is like a classic person who goes out on unemployment, and forget about the special leave program that the feds have set up, but they go out on unemployment because they suspect they've been in contact or have to quarantine for one reason or another, and then they successfully complete the quarantine. I assume there are many, many individuals out there who started to get unemployment because of that and are still receiving unemployment, even though the quarantine period is long since passed. And that is because there's no work search requirement and their former employer hasn't offered, or nobody has come to their door knocking and offering them a job. So they're perfectly legitimate to continue to receive benefits.
Assuming that there is no work search requirement, and the commissioner is really better to talk to the issue of the work search requirement, because I think the requirement for work search has been reinstated in certain cases, and then I don't know if it was waived again now that the virus is worsening. But I think in the fall, in some cases, it was being reinstated because the jobs were available as the economy was recovering. And now that we're seeing the virus spike again, I don't know what the current status of that is, so the commissioner can speak to that. But assuming there's no work search requirement and assuming there hasn't been a reasonable offer of employment made, then an individual could continue to collect unemployment insurance. And similarly, if you are carrying out a work search, but you're not finding a job and you're not getting a reasonable offer of employment, you can stay on unemployment as long as you have benefits. So, but I see the commissioner's just joined us here, so he may be able to answer what the status of the work search requirement is.
Well, let's, Commissioner, thank you for joining us. We're going to continue with Damien, and our schedule, as you know, is to go to 9:25, and then we'll break for the floor. We'll have you back. I imagine the floor action is going to be incredibly short, so stand by. But instead of getting into your testimony right now, let's continue with Damien. Okay, it's a little confusing. We'll clarify that with the commissioner, but I assume there are thousands of people who are in this category who triggered their unemployment early on in the virus and either are still drawing benefits under the first 39 weeks and then the 11-week extension, and just trying to get a classic example of who those people are at this point, and whether we need to cut them off or protect them. We just need to find out the direction in terms of extending this sunset. So could we just return? I think you had one more bullet up there. I don't know that it was substantive, but.
Yep. Let me just share my screen again. And all right. So the next two pieces here, section 32 and 33, just essentially revert us to the pre-COVID-19 law on March 31st. So that's an important date for the committee here. If you're going to extend that, then we need to do that before March 31st. And then section 34 just requires an employer to notify an individual of the availability of unemployment benefits. And I believe that was another housekeeping piece to address some of the federal COVID-19 requirements.
So the March 31st date, forgive me, I thought it was March 1st, but the March 31st date, I would think leaves a gap. If we've extended benefits in a general sense for 11 weeks under the new COVID bill, some of them were scheduled to end on December 31st or 26th or whatever. And so that's going to take us through the beginning of March, and these liberalized policies are all well and good to continue during the pandemic, but if there's no, especially with PUA, which is the federal program for people who otherwise wouldn't be monetarily eligible for UI, if that's going to end, doesn't do us a lot of good. We have a gap perhaps that we have to look at, and I assume the commissioner will talk about that.
So the federal extension is through March 14th, but then there are some complicated sort of phase outs with PUA and so forth that I think the commissioner or Cameron can speak to better about how that will work functionally.
Okay. So this is I mean, it's already very detailed, but it's still very preliminary here. Does anybody, Keisha or anybody else have any questions at this point of Damien? we're going to be on this for a while, so go ahead. Keisha?
I don't know if my questions are for Damien or the commissioner, so I just thought I'd mention 3 questions I had, and we can take them up after the floor so people have some time to think about them. One is, I was actually curious about, I think the first bullet point on electronic registration of businesses. That seems like a very valuable opportunity, which I think the Secretary of State's office is taking advantage of, to collect more demographic and geographic information about who those businesses are. So I was wondering, you know, where that is and if that's part of a federal requirement around these programs. 2 is language access. I think this is a question for the commissioner around the requirements for language access and their protocols right now around people who don't speak English who call their office. And 3 is general demographic information, who's taking care, who's dropping out of the workforce because of childcare reasons, you know, who's getting sick at work. I would imagine that's a federal requirement to have that demographic information. I hope we can explore it as we explore our policy around this. So those are my 3 questions.
Good, thank you for that. Anybody else? And Damien, if you want to add anything, if not, we'll move on to the workers' comp issue in the remaining 10 minutes we have. Okay.
Okay.
Walk us through what we did last year on the presumption. And I think I got the date right on that one. It's January 15th, right? When it sunsets.
That's correct. So this is a little bit more pressing. So let me just pull this up. Okay. So
And Michael,
Yes.
may I ask Nathan a favor? I know Nathan, we're brand new here, but often we post by day. So we list the day, and then all documents and witnesses are listed, anything they present to the committee that day. So the summary, Damien's summary, would be great to put up on the website under today's date, under Damien's name. So each witness, when they have things, that would be great so that we can look at them if, you know, as we're working through this.
yeah, Nathan, I'll send you the file and links to the 2 bills when we're
and just the summary, the bullets and stuff would be helpful.
Yep, I'll send that to him as well.
And let me apologize. I meant to introduce Nathan to the committee. I assume that several of you have spoken with him directly, but I really enjoyed the first week I've had with Nathan. I think he's going to be a great asset to our committee, and I hope you will all reach out to him and have a one-on-one with him, just chatting a little bit as we go forward this week. Okay, Damien.
Okay, so this is Act 150, which did 2 things. The first was here in Section 1, it gave the Department of Labor administrative flexibility.
Damien, I didn't realize the time. I see it's
Yeah,
not.
it's 9:26.
Probably doesn't make sense to jump right in here. We'll pick right up there at that point when we come back, and we'll hear about 5 or 10 minutes about that, and then we'll move to the commissioner. So
Sounds good.
Everybody, time, as Senator Clarkson say, it's time for a loo break. So
2 minutes.